move right on to conduct of business. Item 10A, adopt a resolution approving bylaws for the San Bruno Community Foundation and provide direction regarding selection process for directors to the board.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we're going to be discussing two topics regarding the San Bruno Community Foundation. The first is a review and approval of the final draft of the bylaws that are included in your packet. And the second is a selection process for the directors to the board of the foundation. Let's do a quick review. The City Council has held a total of 4 public study sessions to discuss the formation of the foundation. In the meantime, the city has been acting as the custodian of the $68,750,000, holding it in a secure account pending the formation of the not-for-profit. The articles of incorporation have been filed with the Secretary of State. That was the first step in forming the nonprofit. Most recently, on July 19, the City Council provided direction with respect to the bylaws. That's the second step, and that's one we're going to be addressing tonight. The third step, which we'll also be addressing tonight, is to provide direction on the selection process for appointing the directors to the board. Now, as just a reminder, the foundation itself, while it's been technically formed, can only act through its board of directors. So neither the city nor the foundation at the moment has the authority to spend any of the funds until the board is established and then actually has meetings at which it makes decision about what to do with the funds. There are a great many things that I'm leaving out of the process of things that the board is going to have to do, but that's just a brief overview of where we are right now. So let's take a minute and discuss the bylaws that you have in your packet. There is a revised version in there which incorporated all of the direction from your last meeting. It's been reviewed by our outside attorney, Britt Stratman, who was here at the last study session, as well as the representative from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Mary Ellen Loyens, and they didn't have any additional comments. To summarize, there are really 4 key things that we included in the minutes that are in front of you that came out of the study session. The first is that there's a provision that says city council members would not be on the board of directors. We'll come back to that in a second. The second was expressing a preference for certain expertise among board members, so that's included legal, financial, philanthropic, investment, the finance, those kinds of things. We also included the staggered terms in the bylaws themselves. They didn't have to be there, but we thought it would make sense to do that. And then we retained all of the broad reserved powers at the end of the agreement, so that way the City Council can make sure that what the Board of Directors is doing is consistent with the needs of the community. Let's go back for just a second and flag that key issue. I think we should confess that staff wasn't 100% sure that what the City Council meant was we want to prohibit City Council members from being on the board, as opposed to simply not requiring them to be on the board as the bylaws were previously drawn. So right now what the bylaws say is that no City Council members on the board of directors, so there's a prohibition on that, as opposed to simply taking out the part that said they're required to be on the board or they have 1 seat or 2 seats and that kind of thing. So, subject to any discussion about those items, we're recommending approval of the minutes that you have in front of you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that at the end of my short presentation.
Any questions for City Attorney? Michael?
Through the chair, thank you. So, on the point about the prohibition on the council members, I think at least my intent was not to prevent City Council members from being board members, but rather simply removing the requirement that City Council members be directors. So that was my take on it. I don't know what, I think there were some council members that felt the opposite, that there was a strong need to have council members on there. So maybe removing that statement might get us to more of a middle ground there. I also had questions about something that I found a little bit interesting is that there are references in here to the Brown Act and conducting meetings according to the Brown Act, as well as some language that sounds like it comes from a corporate charter. along with an indemnification of the directors and staff from any legal action. And so I'm wondering, is there any conflict there? If directors were in violation of the Brown Act, would the foundation be responsible for any fees that were assessed on, or any fines that were assessed because of that?
You're asking an excellent question. We'll take the second part first, which is a question that unfortunately is one that we're going to have to figure out if and when it happens, because these bylaws are a marriage of the laws regarding public entity and nonprofit corporations. And while there are lots of nonprofits and there are lots of public entities and lots of public entities that form nonprofits, this is a rather unusual set of circumstances. So it's hard for us to determine hypothetically, well, what if this happens? Would the foundation have to do this or that? That would ultimately be a matter for the board of the foundation to decide based on legal advice that it gets from its own independent legal advisor. So I don't want to avoid answering the question, which it probably sounds like I'm doing, but I think it's important to understand that these questions have lots of fact-specific things about them that are just impossible to answer in the abstract.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so I guess there's a little bit of a gray area there.
There's always a gray area.
Right. The other thing I wanted to just clarify is that on the final page, it says approval of incurrence of indebtedness, but there's no amount. So I guess we need to figure out what amount's going to be filled in there before we approve these. Are there any recommendations on what that number should be?
Yeah,
16H.
Yeah, we thought about that. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary to say it's the same signature authority, for example, as the city manager has, for example, which I think is $25,000. That would certainly be reasonable. If the board ultimately and in the future wanted to change that, they could. Although it's important to note that once the bylaws are set, they're set for quite a long time, because the foundation has to go through the 501c3 approval process with this set of bylaws without any changes. But that seemed like a reasonable amount to recommend.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Ken?
Through the chair. On the issue of council members, I was in favor of not having council members on the board. I think if there's any discussion on that, it seems like a conflict to be on the board and then being a part of the reserve powers. You can't have both sides of the street on that. That's what just majority of San Bruno residents, I think that's very clear. The question is, at what point, there's going to have to be we're going to have to be mindful of whether we're going to have five board members, 7 board members, 9 board members, or whatever, and then make sure that we maintain the majority. And with that said, I'm a little concerned about just having directors that have an expertise in being on a board, being in this type of organization. I'm questioning on whether other entities also are made up of just strictly those with expertise in nonprofits.
So that's a good question, if I may just address that issue. The bylaws don't actually require that. What they say is directors should include individuals with particular expertise in areas applicable to the operation, such as so on and so forth. So it doesn't require you to appoint people that have that particular expertise. It's really just a recommendation. If you wanted to, you could require it, but it's not required.
Okay. I sort of read it a little stricter than that. Yeah.
Right, they don't all have to have that expertise. Yeah. It's just
it's a
recommending
director
that some
should
of them
include individuals. Okay.
Right.
So and that's fine. I guess, in comment to what Michael said about the debt occurrence, the $25,000 seems fine, because the council does have reserve powers to review the budget. And so even if there's expenditures under 25,000, it would be in a particular line item, you know, so it wouldn't come out of the blue. My understanding. That's all I have.
Okay. Anyone else? Irene?
Well, it depends on what is said about council people being on the board. As you know from my last discussion, I firmly believe that the city council, whoever it is, are ultimately responsible to the voters. And as our city attorney said, this is a unique board. It's a hybrid between nonprofit organizations and public entities. So to me, the city council are the people who are directly responsible to the voters. And if they are not on this board, nobody in that board is going to be directly responsible to the voters. That's one half of it. The other half is, if we keep all those powers that we have, 3 people on the city council ultimately have the power over everything that board does. So in one way, you're saying hands off for this council, and on the other hand, you're saying, well, ultimately, 3 of us are going to decide. So I personally can't vote for the structure of that part of who's going to be on the board. So the rest of it's fine. The $25,000 seems fine. I just like clarification on that, though. My understanding from how the city manager works and other boards that I am on, between board meetings, if a need comes up, the CEO or general manager or city manager has the authority to write a check up to the $25,000 that is not necessarily in the budget. And am I incorrect on that, if there's an emergency or if there is something that comes up? I mean, it's not necessarily that, but it could be that.
It could be that, but typically, and that would be a very unusual circumstance. The authority of the city managers up to $25,000 is typically exercised for items that are in the budget.
Right.
And that are authorized and expected expenditures. They do not otherwise come to the city council for validation, verification, or action, approval by the city council. So for example, if, and we do have a couple of things in the current year's budget where we have, let's say, a $15,000 expenditure anticipated for a consultant study and report. Thinking of a housing nexus study, let's say, for example. That item is in the current year budget. Let's say the item is under $25,000. It would be done under my signature authority typically and would not require additional action by the city council to authorize the expenditure. You are correct that, and that's how, that is the typical use of the city manager's expenditure authority. It would be a very unusual situation where under some, again, unusual emergency set of circumstances, I would have the authority to authorize an expenditure of $25,000 or less. However, if it's not in the budget, it would still have to come back to the city council at some point to be authorized, because that the funding would need to be appropriated.
Okay. I think we're saying the same things. I just wanted to be clear for everyone that that is a possibility, however remote.
It is, and it's actually a very, I mean, what I'm describing is a very constrained set of circumstances. In other words, the not-for-profit entity still exercises fairly substantial control, just as the city council exercises total control over the city's budget and its expenditures. It's just the way that the budget would be implemented.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sorry, if I may, through the chair, just to follow up on that, there is a slight nuance that I should point out, which is what this section here, H, is really referring to is indebtedness of the corporation, not the signature authority of the executive director, who hasn't actually been hired yet. So presumably, the executive director of the corporation will have a certain signature authority that he or she can expend before or without getting board approval, not city council approval, but board approval. What this is relating to is the indebtedness of the corporation. So if you set this at $25,000, for example, what you're really saying is the corporation can't spend more than $25,000 without coming to the city council, or without at least getting that approval at some point in the process. So it's a little different.
Rico, anything?
Yeah, I mean, we've gone over this for quite a bit, and I'm still on the same page that I was before, and I do understand that there's a lot of reserves power, and it does go back. To me, it's just a philosophical view. It's not because anyone wants to wear more hats, but this is the elected body that is responsible for the overall budget and any expenditures that come from committee, commissions, and boards. There is oversight. The need for transparency is great, and I think it's critical. If there's an expenditure clause like what the city manager has, even though it's remote and it can be expended, then to me that is not transparency. I know there's a budget that's going to come up, and so there's a path that they go on, but then it comes here, as Vice Mayor had said, and then three of us say, well, no, go back to the drawing board. So in the way it's formulated as far as that, I'm still having a difficulty with that. And again, that's just my philosophy on that. I think there is an election every 2 years. It's for a majority of the city council, and it sets direction, and it sets guidance. And I think that's the importance of why you need to have that still come back here, because this was money through a settlement that was entrusted to the city to do what is best for the community, which the board will set that and give that guidance. But I think ultimately, as I'll go back to the example, the board comes up with a budget. It says this is how we want to spend it, whatever they feel is best. Get 100 people in the room or 50, and they say, what are you thinking? And we go like this, because we've appointed the people, but yet then that's it. So again, it's a unique situation that we're in, so that is my part of the bylaws that I still have the challenge with.
Okay, and I'd like to err on the side of caution, I guess, maybe a little cynical, but believe it or not, I think politics could enter into the fray if council members are on this board, number one. And number two, I certainly want to segregate the city council from the board, because I wouldn't want to jeopardize the not-for-profit status going forward. I mean, there's entities in the state that could say, wait a second, you got a board, but the council's on there, for crying out loud, and they're really running the show. What's going on here? And so I really have in the beginning, I thought it's not too bad to have a couple of council members on there, but we will, in fact, have a tremendous amount of influence with reserve powers, and just the fact that we are the representatives of the people of the city of San Bruno. So that really, I've thought a lot about it. It'd be nice to be on the board, all of us, that'd be great, but I wouldn't want to take any chance at all of invalidating the actual not-for-profit entity and having someone in the state say, you know, you're really not a not-for-profit. You as a city council are running this, and that's particularly set up in the direction of the document itself. Says we will set up a not-for-profit for the benefit of all of the people of the city of San Bruno. And believe me, we will, along with all of you that are here and that are listening, you know, direct that, have that input, because it is, in fact, for all of you. So whether it's something to be built or something to be donated or something to be granted, they'll have plenty of our influence without people being on that board. I wouldn't want to jeopardize our not-for-profit status there. So that's my feeling. And as far as the 25,000, I mean, that's fine. I think the main thing tonight is to get this established. The other thing that's in the agenda too, and I'd like to confirm, in fact, Mr. Salazar and myself were on the initial setting up of some of the wording initially in this, and I'd like to keep the two of us on this as a subcommittee to meet very shortly, because I believe, Mark, this has to be decided upon, and these directors have to be appointed very shortly to get to this process, and how we're going to put the questionnaires out, solicit people, and
Right.
their requirements and their expertise.
That's correct. I do have a couple of comments about that, but I didn't want to leave the topic of the bylaws until we have at least a majority as to which way it's going to be. And so I think I've heard two individuals indicate they would want to prohibit council members on the board, which is what it says now. Two would want to require them, and one that I think we still need a firm decision on. Do you want it the way it's written in the bylaws, or would you prefer?
Actually,
some other
having
way?
heard what the mayor had to say, I think I'll withdraw my objection to that language and agree to leave it in there.
Okay, very good. So as it stands now, then, the bylaws would be written as is to prohibit city council members on the board of directors.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to expand on that before we
Yes,
vote on the resolution?
just a couple of brief comments. And really for the benefit of the public, as you know, the city has maintained a website and an email address to receive information from members of the public who are interested in the foundation. The city's also received expressions of interest from people who would perhaps like to be members of the board. We think it's appropriate now to renew those outreach efforts to everyone here and who's listening or watching on television. In the meantime, we recommend that a selection process, application process be developed with the assistance of staff, a subcommittee to be appointed by the mayor, and then also the experts that we've been using at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation who have done this before, and there's no need to really reinvent that wheel. They have lots of templates and options that can be used for the selection process. The purpose of the subcommittee, in essence, would be to screen, evaluate candidates, and then recommend only to the full city council which candidates they would recommend to be on the board. We would envision the council could then conduct interviews of whoever it wanted, including those who were recommended, and then appoint them. And then once those folks are selected, we can file the bylaws and some other paperwork that's really important with the Secretary of State. And here's the deadline. The deadline is October 22nd. So it has to be done fairly quickly, and there's a 90-day deadline from the time that the articles are filed until this other piece of paper has to be filed with the Secretary of State. So by that time, the board and board officers will need to have been selected and then listed on that paperwork. So after that, the good news is there are no other major imminent deadlines, but then the work of the foundation needs to continue in terms of getting its 501c3 status with both the federal, with the IRS and with the state. So there's a lot of work to be done, but right now I'd like to close simply by indicating that after having received some direction on the bylaws, we're just looking for some direction in terms of the staff recommendation to appoint a subcommittee and then to work with them to move the selection process forward.
Okay, you already have the subcommittee, myself and Mr. Salazar. Right. And then you're looking for us to adopt this resolution this evening?
Sorry, say it again, I'm sorry.
You're looking for us to adopt this resolution this evening?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That's the request. Would someone like to introduce a resolution for
I'll
adoption?
introduce the resolution for a vote.
Councilmember Salazar.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
No.
Councilmember Adair.
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell.
No.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye. Okay. Item 10B, adopt a resolution authorizing...
Through the chair?
Yes,
I have a
Maureen?
question. Could you go over what it is that the subcommittee is doing? And I didn't hear us have any discussion about how we are selecting people, how many we're selecting.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, through the chair, if it was unclear, it was staff's recommendation that the subcommittee do certain things. It's obviously up to all of you as to what powers to give that subcommittee. And it could include anything from simply developing a selection process to doing more than that, such as looking at candidates, vetting them, and making recommendations. That's up to you, and I didn't mean to suggest that that was anything other than a staff recommendation.
So what is it that we are,
Well, I guess we'll let you know as soon as we meet. We really haven't talked about it yet.
no, I mean, isn't this council going to have input? This whole council have input?
Absolutely. That would be my intention, and I think I can speak for Michael. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, but I thought we would have input about how we're doing the process. Like, are you going to make up a application and put it out? Are you going to?
I think it's premature, but I think the intent would be to sit down with some of the members of, for instance, the Silicon Valley Foundation to see how they set these things up, some of the qualifications that might be beneficial to this corporation, different things like that, and then come back to the council with a recommendation on how to proceed. The unfortunate thing is we have to get this done quickly, so it's the process. It's not the selection, it's the process, and then we'll put it out to whoever would like to apply, along with, if you have someone you'd like to nominate or recommend, that'd be fine too. But I think it's up to us to try to set some parameters as to the qualifications of people we would like to see on this board.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, if the subcommittee, having informed the subcommittee, staff could recommend that we quickly convene a meeting, given the importance and the time frame we're working under, and bring back at your next meeting, which will be September 10th. We'll give you 2 weeks to consult with the Silicon Valley Foundation and anybody else that you might wish, and bring back your preliminary information and investigation and some recommendations for the City Council to consider. That would still give us time then to determine how the council would like to proceed.
Mm-hmm. All right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.